Welcome back to the Battle of Second Bull Run. So I'm not going to do a full camp setup this time, in some ways because I think it's less important for this battle, as you can frankly go in with just about anything you want. It's an incredibly easy battle for the Union. So just doing a brief overview of the state of my forces before camp. You can see the amount of rifles I have. I have a good amount. Not going to be fully on the best rifles yet. But starting to get up there. And we have plenty of artillery if we need it, plenty of officers. We don't have a ton of money. We have tons of recruits. So I'm not going to be going through and using the full 5,000 veterans this time around. So here's what my army is going to look like after I set everything up. My first corps is going to be primarily artillery, specifically for the first day. I've got all my best artillery in there, and I've got it with the experience and max accuracy general to maximize my benefit from these units. And I've got my 10 pounders and some new 3-inch units, along with several sharpshooters and various skirmisher units to spot and cover the artillery. This is my primary corps with most of my infantry. A lot of these units got only 2,500 in veterans. Some were only recruits, just because I just didn't have the money after I started buying up the officers and filled out supply and all that. I'm going with the full 300k supply, so if you're going a more infantry heavy approach, you won't need anywhere near that much, so you can spend a lot more on veterans if you want to. I've created a few new units here and there, mostly just to start getting them trained up. They won't do a whole lot, but at least we'll get their morale and stamina stat up quite a bit. But in general, I didn't really expand the army all that much. I just got units up to a larger size where they'll be useful later. My infantry isn't going to be doing a whole lot. Cavalry is still pretty small. I didn't put any veterans into them this time around. And I did go with the 8th point in training. I'm hoping to have that, or I guess I'm going to completely max that out after this battle, I think. Didn't have quite enough for the full 300k, but wanted to buy one extra officer, I think. And I did buy the 4,000 Lorenzes. I don't have enough to get the 61s, but that's all right. We're going to be able to get a lot more Lorenzes later. We're still at a pretty high training and weapons value, so we'll see what that ends up being. This first day numbers don't mean a whole lot. So this first phase, there isn't a lot you can do. Like, you could try and get around to the town, you could try and go into the woods, but the AI units start in pretty favorable positions and they will see you pretty easily. So instead, we're just going to put a bunch of artillery in the corner, because even though the AI can see them, it won't go after them. Send some snipers up to spot. And once we kill the artillery, then we can do whatever we want, because basically, unless you send infantry units across the river, the AI is completely passive and more or less won't do anything. So just speeding right through here, we're just going to be sitting around a lot and watching artillery fire. And we'll work on these units in the woods a little bit, and then we'll switch to the units in the open where we'll do a bit more damage. I could probably actually move my artillery out of the woods and into the open, where they wouldn't have the woods damage penalty. That might be a little more efficient, but they're doing just fine as they are. I'm not too worried about it. The entire battle is basically going to be some variation of this. So now moving the snipers up into the open. Normally this would be a really bad idea because there's enemy snipers on the map, or skirmishers on the map, and they have lots of infantry, but for whatever reason, the AI is set to be so incredibly passive that you can just move into the open like this and they won't even try and go after you. So we're just going to rack up a bunch of kills and then continue to do so throughout the next couple of days. We are running out of ammo here. You don't get a supply wagon, but it's not really a concern. since we're just spending extra time. You can see the kill ratios on some of those guns. The 3-star unit's definitely doing really well. So shattering a few units. One thing I did discover, a bit of a bug, is that it does appear that you don't get credit, or that the split brigades don't carry over from multiple days. So like Talifera's 2nd Brigade won't show up in the post-battle screen at the end of day 3, which is a little unfortunate. I thought I had solved that issue, but I think they're just, since these units are kind of getting generated on the fly, they aren't really in the, I think what happens is the list of units gets pulled out of the assets file, and since I'm just sort of copying units, they just don't get included. So it's a little unfortunate, but it's just, I guess, a straight difficulty increase. You do at least get the experience and such from killing them off, even if you don't get the extra weapons and the numbers aren't quite right at the end, which is a little unfortunate, but I'll give it a shot, but I'm not sure there's much I can do about it. So just going through and taking a look at the experience we gained, it's going all right. And then I'm moving 2 3-inch units over to the 1st Brigade Corps, since I had forgotten that you get 16 units, not 14. I did the math wrong when I was calculating ahead of time. So you can see we're actually outnumbering the AI at this point. So this is going to be pretty easy. We're just going in with more artillery again. And just going to line everything up along the northern part of the map. We're going to send some skirmishers out in front just in case something comes up, and to do some spotting and to get them some experience on units they can fire on. And we're just going to systematically destroy everything on the railroad track, and then we'll destroy everything behind it, and then we're going to wait for more units to show up, and then we're going to rinse and repeat. You do end up going through almost 300k in supply doing this, so if you don't want to do that, or want to get some more experience for your infantry, you can definitely use the infantry a little more actively, and that'll cut down the supply needs quite a bit, and then you'll get a lot more experience on the infantry, though you will take a few more losses. Though we have enough weapons and such that really isn't going to be too big a problem. I'd be a little more concerned about not getting my infantry more experience if the next couple of battles are not going to be pretty easy. Crampton's Gap is very easy. South Mountain is a little tricky, but we should be able to get through it without too much trouble. And then Antietam for the Union is not particularly difficult. So all those battles I can use to train up my infantry a little bit more, since my artillery is more or less going to be about as good as it's going to get pretty quickly. They aren't all at 3 stars yet, but we're actually going to have to start switching out the 3 stars and training up more 1 and 2 star units. It's one of the things you have to be careful about, especially in this mod, is because the experience gain is slower, it takes longer to train units up, and you really want to keep cycling units out so that you don't end up in a situation where you only have like 1 corps worth of really good units, and all of your 3 star artillery and snipers and stuff are eating all the experience from the rest of your units. So you can see I've pushed them off the rail line. You can push the snipers up into positions to hit units on the rail line, but you do have to be careful because units will return and try and jump back into them, and they will jump into them, and the angles will work out such that you'll take a lot of weird fire on the skirmishers, and sometimes you won't have a chance to fire at those units jumping into the fortifications before like they can fire at you just because of how fortifications work. It's pretty weird. So you do got to be careful with moving the units forward and backwards. But since the AI basically is assigned to just sit in the fortifications, you can do this all day long without really having any concern that you're going to get your artillery overrun or anything like that. You do have to be a little careful with that unit at the very end of the line by the river. Sometimes that can be a little harder to spot, but we were able to get our snipers to be able to see it pretty easily, so it wasn't too big an issue. There are multiple skirmish units and cavalry across the river. They aren't too aggressive early on in the battle, though you do need to be careful because when they do activate, especially with this no infantry setup, they can be pretty dangerous. That 2,000 3-star cavalry up there can be extremely dangerous if they decide to really go after you. That can ruin your day. So, slowly clearing out the units that are trying to occupy the first line of defenses. We are taking a few losses on the skirmishers. Might be better to have pulled them back and just let the artillery work, but I figured we'd kill that unit pretty quickly, and it does shatter. So, no big loss. I'm sliding the snipers up. I want to try and work on getting rid of those skirmishers. They do have some artillery in the area, but the AI tends to mostly have Napoleon's 12-pounders or 10-pound parrots in this battle, which just don't have particularly good range. And so they just kind of sit back there and don't do a whole lot. You'll also notice that I've moved my artillery so that they are generally all standing in the open versus being in the woods. If you want a little less micromanagement, just put them in the woods. They'll be a little bit safer. But I wanted to try and maximize the damage I was doing. So I'm not specifically targeting anything at the moment. I'm just sort of letting the artillery fire at whatever they're closest to. Now that I've moved the siege gun and the Whitworth up, I am going to start getting rid of that artillery. That gives me a little more freedom to move stuff around. And when the reinforcements arrive, then I'll have to worry less about accidentally suddenly taking counter battery fire. I could probably be more aggressive about moving artillery up, just because it's pretty unlikely the AI is going to send anything down. But I'm in a position where I can hit stuff, and around 34 minutes is when the reinforcements start coming up, and then the AI starts moving around a little bit more. And then you have to try and move all your artillery back, so it's just safer to keep them where they are and not push forward so much. Because all it really takes is one infantry unit getting into you a little too far, and you can lose a lot of really valuable units while you're doing this. If you wanted to be even more aggressive, you could probably pull the skirmishers out of position and just have them running around a whole lot to gain a bunch of stamina stats. I decided to sort of more leave them in place and just sort of as a protective mechanism. Also trying to get the supply wagon moving around to keep the snipers more or less full of ammo. The one problem with snipers is that the refill rate on them is actually pretty slow. It actually takes quite a while to get them loaded up, it feels like, compared to artillery. It's probably the rate of shots versus, since I think skirmishers have something like, 45 versus the 20 or whatnot that most artillery has, it probably takes twice as long. So you can see the reinforcements arrived. They all set up. I had pulled my 20-pounders and all my artillery back so that they weren't going to get shot by units reoccupying the railroad line. I did, however, not really account for the cavalry moving forward as much as it did, and so this is sort of a panic moment where it's like, wait a minute, I have 2,000 cavalry coming at me with stuff that's going to reveal me so that the units like early can fire at me right now. So what I'm trying to do is set all of my artillery to focus fire the 2 cav units to hopefully break them down enough to scare them off. And I'm trying to get all my skirmisher units in line where they can hit them. So we get lucky, we rout the 2nd Brigade. And they aren't actually charging. I'm not sure who they're going for. We do get into melee here, which is pretty dangerous, but they aren't charging, so they're losing a lot of their power, and we're in the woods. So combine that with a bunch of canister fire and stuff, and we're able to drive them off. So that was a little scary, but it turned out all right. I'm going to guess that that cav was not equipped with melee weapons and probably didn't have charge perks. If it had charge perks, I think it would have probably been more likely to actually charge one of my units, and then, this entire attempt might have fallen apart. So we've got this other skirmisher unit poking its nose in, but we're able to rout it pretty quickly. And we're going to send up all of our infantry to not really engage, but just to provide a blocking force. Like if the cav comes after us again, then we'll be able to deal with it. And we're bringing up some smooth bar artillery. It's not going to do a whole lot this battle. I could probably be more aggressive with it to try and get it more experience. I'm also not going to press up particularly far with any of my infantry. Like you could start trying to wrap all the way around the Confederate right, but I'm just going to let the reinforcements walk through there and try and reoccupy the fortifications, and we'll just keep blasting away with the artillery. I'm also very lucky here that my Whitworth and all of my artillery is basically not visible. That is in range of those 2 artillery units sitting up there. I could have taken a lot of casualties from that if they had been visible. So definitely lucky there. Certainly with cavalry that close, the fact they can't see me is quite good. Same with those skirmishers. I think I got lucky, and the skirmishers don't have spotting perks. So this was almost certainly the most dangerous part of this entire battle. This little setup where all those reinforcements come in and they push off my line, and a couple of them actually come forward. But after I drive off the artillery and the skirmishers and the cav, then it's right back to business as usual. Nothing really happens. So just pushing up the skirmishers again to get vision. This is why it's definitely useful to have multiple sets of speed skirmishers here to be able to switch out the unit that is pushing up and taking extra casualties. Sometimes you've got to be a little careful moving up into the trees across the railroad cut. But again, I think since the skirmishers ended up not having spotting bonuses, I'm able to move around pretty freely. So I'm putting a couple infantry units in that clump of trees down to the south, just as sort of a blocking mechanism, because sometimes the second set of reinforcements can come into that area, and I just don't want them walking up into my artillery line unnoticed. So this is again where if you wanted to be a little riskier, you could just have your infantry running in loops for most of the battle, since they really don't end up doing anything. But as a precaution, it's good to have them there just in case something goes wrong. And now that I'm pretty sure most of the AI units have moved out, I'm sending a couple of skirmishers down to take the vision point and give me a better. So that'll give me a better idea when the second wave starts showing up. And there's not a whole lot of stuff in this area, but we still have a few targets for the artillery. And as long as you delay enough, you can pretty consistently not run into anything with your scouts when you're running into those areas. I'm pretty sure I've cleared out pretty much everything, so I'm going to try and steal the supply wagon. If you're lucky, sometimes 2 will be over there. The second one seemed like it went somewhere to the southwest, so it's going to take a while until I can capture it. Sometimes there's skirmishers up in this area, but not always. Your sight lines are pretty bad on the hill, so got to be a little bit careful. But if you're using those speed skirmishers, they aren't going to take too much damage, and they're not too experienced, so they're easy to replace if you need to. Also, one thing I've been trying to do is keep my experienced generals covering most of my units, just to get as much out of the situation as I can. And now we get a second line. And this is where, like, normally you would see people moving up to like that north-south line of woods above the little town there, or all the way over to the vision point. I'm actually mostly just going to have these units run around a little bit because I know I have a little bit of time, and that I'm more or less going to set up on the same line I'm already taken because I have this very nice infantry cluster set up, and the AI is going to be very accommodating and just walk back into these fortifications every time you clear them out. So there's just no reason to push forward the infantry and try and get into a fight down there. I guess the reason would be, if you wanted to do that, would be if you want to get more experience for the infantry and for the smoothbores. You could move, there's not a whole lot of artillery that comes with the reinforcements, so there is a bit, but you could move everything to like that far, to the line of trees where I have the vision point in the southwest, and set up a pretty decent defense there and have good flanking opportunities and such. So I'm moving a few units to the south just because I want to sort of cover the line. Sometimes the AI units, if you don't have anything in the area, they will these units will go further into your left flank. And so if you have some units in the area, then you just have some coverage. So moving everything back again, now that I know there's reinforcements coming, because I'm not certain if the second set of Confederate reinforcements will try and occupy the railroad cut, but I figure I'll just move everything back, and if they don't, then I'll move forward again. Doesn't cost me too much. And after walking everything around, now I'm going to move it all forward again so I can have some blocking forces in place in case any of those units do come forward. So have the scouts in the hill there. They have a little bit better vision than if they're back in the tree line, and I don't really expect anything to come that way. You can stay on the point a little bit longer. There's no real reason to, though. You'll just get shot up a little bit before you have to run away. So I more or less know where the AI is going, so I don't actually need vision of them. Sending the cav around to the south, I'll eventually capture some wagons over there. And not a whole lot for the artillery to shoot at for now, but in a few minutes there will be. So I should have moved that unit out earlier, take some extra shots that I didn't need. Going to leave the damaged unit there, and I'll send the fresh unit out and around in case I run into anything. Not really sure what their skirmishers are doing here. Maybe they're probably going for the supply wagon, I guess. But, well, we kind of have a lot of units that are going to be able to fire at them, so I'm not particularly concerned about it. We'll get Baylor turned around, and then we'll flank that unit and run it off pretty quick. Sniper unit took a little bit more damage than I wanted to there. Maybe it was for some other stuff. We did get the surrender. I think they're armed with sharps, so that's not actually all that useful, but always nice when that goes in our favor, at least. Also worth noting that in the sort of southeast area of this map, if you tell units to move long distances, a lot of the pathing is really weird. You take a lot of weird looping paths. I'm not really sure why they just don't move in straight lines, but they don't. So if you're trying to get them somewhere on a particular schedule, pay attention to that because you might click and they'll go on a giant loop. Just collecting supply wagons, taking the vision point again now that everything's run past it. And in general, the AI continues to be incredibly passive and just doesn't offer up much resistance. And in some ways, I mean, this is a little bit of a problem with the AI just not having particularly good artillery on this map. But I mean, even if they had really good artillery, I guess some of my units are spotted at the moment. Like, I'd have to be a little more cautious, even if they had a bunch of Whitworths or siege guns. Like, I'd have to be a little more cautious with my positioning. But overall, you could do the same thing. Just start a little further back, knock off all of the units up close, push up, rinse and repeat over and over and over. So this is another one of the. I mean, this is largely possible in the base game as well. Not quite to this extent, but more or less you can still do it. I think in the base game where it starts to fall apart is you don't have access to as much supply, so it slows down pretty quick at that point. But this is definitely one of the battles where if you really want to make it interesting past a point, like you either need to make the AI much more aggressive, give it a lot more units, or change around the phase timings or something or other, just so you can't just sit here and destroy things with artillery. Like, one of the things that you could potentially do is like shorten the timers in the first couple of phases, so that you have much less time before the enemy reinforcements arrive, and then the day just ends earlier. And that would just reduce the time that you'd have to sit there and fire a lot of, just let the artillery work. And what would actually be interesting with that is if the AI stockpiled all those units up really quick and had all those fortifications filled, that might mean that the AI would actually be more aggressive in terms of going after you. I'm not sure if the extra units will let it do that or not. It might just be on too passive a setting in the first 2 days, and it's only really on the third day where it'll really do anything. That would probably be in terms of pure difficulty, probably the answer would basically be skip the first day entirely, skip most of the second day, and go straight to the third day where the entire map's available and the AI isn't completely locked into holding these fortifications. And then it would actually turn into a battle where the AI actually comes after you and you can't just sit there and blast away with long range artillery for free all day. Not sure if that's really the best course of action. That does change up the battle quite a bit. But in terms of really making it a challenge, that's probably most of the answer, because there's only so much you can do when the AI is set to fairly defensive settings. You could theoretically also change it to just the suicidal attacker, and then it might leave the fortifications and come after you. I'm not positive about that. I'm not sure which one of those settings overrides the other. And then holding this line would be a little trickier, but I don't know, just not a whole lot going on in this battle, so I figured I'd speculate on just some potential changes you could make to make it a little more interesting. I have a bunch of infantry in the southwest. They're basically, what I'm trying to do is establish a line. Now that the reinforcements have mostly gone across, I'm trying to establish a line so that the 3-star cavalry, which eventually shows up, doesn't get into behind me. Because if they do, then they are annoying to chase down, and they'll take the point behind you and all kinds of things. So trying to set myself up to avoid that situation. And meanwhile, Cav just goes and steals more wagons while the rest of the reinforcements just keep walking into the fortifications and getting shot to pieces. I think I also expected that the map extends a little bit more on this day. I don't think it ends up doing so. Just misremembered how that works. But that's why I have like the 2 extra infantry units standing in the rear down there. I thought the map was going to expand and I was going to have to spread out a little bit further. I could have been doing something else with those, I think. So just shattering more units. Every now and again, a unit will come up and bother the skirmishers, but if they do that, you just retreat a little bit until they get hidden, and then the artillery will all focus on them, and that unit will either die or run away. I guess that's probably the other difference is since the timers are a little bit longer in the mod. In the base game, you might not have quite the length of time to just sit there and fire away with the artillery, though you still have a pretty long time. From what I remember, I played the battle pretty similarly in the base game. You could also certainly use up the supply from the AI wagons and stuff if you wanted to. They're certainly pretty easy to get. Just trying to position so I can get that brigade out of the way, and then I can send the speed skirmishers to try and capture the wagon again. Not quite sure what's up there. When I see the artillery, I think that's when I decide to start backing off. Or, nope, I double down and just send all the skirmishers up there. Okay, now I finally realized that maybe I don't want to take canister in the flank. I'm also just leaving the cavalry up there. That's probably not a great plan. I should probably be moving when I'm moving up all of my infantry, I should probably be moving up at least 1 unit to where I can guard the ford. And you can see, since I got a little overeager, I don't really have artillery or infantry support. Now I have to deal with these small brigades, but they aren't going to do too much, and we'll be able to deal with it with just the skirmishers pretty easily. Now we are taking a little artillery fire, which is great, but now we're hidden again, and we'll get some snipers on that artillery and then solve the problem that way. This is definitely the part where I probably should have gotten the infantry more involved. I should have just sent it up first instead of the skirmishers. Worth noting, I definitely don't want to take the flag, so I don't want to push that far. And this is where I definitely should have left a unit guarding the ford, and then this wouldn't be a problem. But we've got flanking fire and such in that area, so able to deal with that unit pretty easily. And we shattered that. And I promptly forget that there's still a cavalry unit over there and that I should definitely put a unit on that ford. And again, just don't bother. Since we're getting close to the end of the day and I don't think anything else is coming in, I tell my infantry to start running around to gain some stamina. I don't remember exactly how long the timer goes, so. And now we get charged by the cav, which is not great, but that unit's already at half strength, so it's not going to be performing too well. And we do have a lot of these units in the area to put fire into it. And then we shatter that unit. And now we finally got the infantry coming up. We are taking a little fire from Dreyfus's 1st Brigade since we're just kind of throwing the infantry out there, but we're going to take so few losses in the battle that it's not really that big a deal. If you really took your time and played this absolutely perfectly, this is one of those battles you might be able to get close to 0 casualties. Instead, we lose an officer, lose 100 men or so. But these units are all so depleted that they're going to break pretty easily. So just issuing more orders to get units wandering around. And you can also see that if you wanted to, it would be very easy to get a day 1 win. All I'd have to do is push this line of infantry forward, we'd hold the point and be done. But there's more units on day 3, I guess. So we'll just draw it out, kill off everything else, and get some extra weapons. Having the skirmishers charged is not great. I'm trying to get them back so they don't take a volley. Also trying to get the 1-star sniper in the way so that the 3 stars don't get shot, because one of those is much easier to replace. And I think that, yeah, that worked. We still got the sniper's shot as opposed to some other unit, but we'll have enough scope rifles, we can repair them. Did take a little bit of a volley there before we were able to shatter the unit, but overall, very low losses. Though engaging this 3-star infantry unit in the woods is not particularly great. So I start pulling units off again. So I have to be a little careful as some of these larger units come over. Don't really want to fight them in the open, but we've got so much artillery here that that unit isn't going to stay around for too long. So as we get later in the day, you can see the visibility starting to go down as, I guess, the sun goes down. So we're going to have to keep pushing the skirmishers up to be able to find targets. AI is not particularly aggressive, but you can see there's a bunch of units clustered in the woods down there. And they're occasionally coming over to sit in the fortifications, but anything that gets in there disappears real quick. But if we were using the rest of this infantry, we could very easily just wrap the entire line from the south at this point and just clear up the whole mess. I'm not sure if the fortifications are occupied to the southwest of their line. They might be clear by this point, not certain. But we're still getting vision on stuff and getting targets, so we'll just keep killing it off until the day ends. We do want to make sure we don't actually kill all the units, because that would also end the battle. But I'm banking on a couple of units still being in the southwest that I don't know where they are. So I'm assuming that I won't accidentally kill them off early. Though that skirmisher was probably wandering over where he would see them, and then we'd end the day. But so yeah, okay. Going into the next day, we lost almost nothing, and they're down to 14,000 men, even with the reinforcements. You can see the XP values really starting to stack up, especially on the units that have been there all the way from the beginning. But much worse XP on the rest of these. But we're gonna definitely got units that are gonna get up to 1 star with not a great officer in charge, so that's always a bonus. And now our entire line is reset up, so we're going to have to make some adjustments, but we're pretty much going to set up in more or less the same way. I'm not expecting the AI to do too much, but we're going to get some blocking units in place. I don't think they try and occupy the railroad cut on this day, so you don't have to be quite as careful, and their artillery is almost all gone, so don't have to worry about that too much. There are units that start in the southwest, and they will try and contest the town and the north-south tree line. So I am not going to try and rush units over there to get in position to try and take those lines. I'm just going to take this little position here along the creek and let the AI largely run into the open area to the northeast again. Most of my smoothbore artillery is going to get clustered around that center location in case I do get attacked by something. And then I'm going to set up the same line in the southwest to block the cavalry that came in. This is where it's been a while since I played this battle. You can tell my knowledge is not really up to date because I set up blocking units down there on the first day that I really didn't need because nothing comes in. It all comes in on the third day. And then I also promptly, do not remember where the enemy cavalry spawns in, and well, there will be a merry chase soon. Also worth noting that there's in the north here, there's the vision point behind my lines that I don't really occupy. I've tried putting units there. It doesn't seem to do a whole lot. It seems more effective just to have the skirmishers up front, and then you see just as much as you would whether or not you have the point controlled. So you can see there are some units that are in that town already. I don't really want to fight them here, but they're pretty small, so I'll just have my infantry deal with them. You can see we've decimated their army so much that there's basically nothing in the trenches in the northeast, so a lot of the enemy units are going to move up there. Moving the wagon over to take the point just to see if it does anything, and it doesn't really change much. Again, since I'm not sure where the enemy cavalry is or when it spawns in, I'm a little hesitant to move stuff up around their flank. I think I could have actually gotten away with doing it much earlier than I do. But we've pretty much hit the defensive lines that we're going to hold for the remainder of the battle. As I see units coming in, to the railroad cut, it turns out they do want to try and occupy it. So I pull all those units back. Though I'm not going to pull the artillery back, I'm just going to put the infantry in front to soak some shots and for anything that sticks around. Should have pulled that light infantry back a little sooner. It's going to take a few more losses than I'd like. But even though we're going to take some shots, most of those units are so small that they can't really do a whole lot. So as that lone unit's coming up, I start moving the cav up to hopefully maybe see if we can get a capture or something. And then the unit decides to stop just before the water line. Not really sure what's going on there, but and it looks like they do have a couple of units coming down south. And that's where I was talking about on the second day that if you don't have units in areas, they will just sort of start going after the VPs and stuff down here. So you can see the pathing's a little weird, and that unit was actually trying to turn to fire at us. But we managed to rout it before it was able to, and we didn't take the routing volley or anything, so just free kills for the cav. One thing in retrospect I wish I had focused on a little bit more is getting that 1-star cav unit up to 2 stars. It'd be really nice to get him in set up to be a scouting cav. That's so I can use that instead of having to bring my, because like right now my only scouting unit is the 3-star skirmisher, who I actually want to start not using all that much anymore, just because experience isn't going to help him a whole lot. So I'd rather get the experience and bring other units to the battle. So yeah, I moves units over, but is not particularly aggressive, so it just sort of sits in range where I can get shots off. As far as I know, you can actually give up most of these VPs. They don't matter a whole lot, but just easier to hold a good line and not let it's a pretty big battlefield with a lot of water and stuff running around it, so just easier to prevent stuff from getting back there and having to go chase it down. Being pretty bold, just moving the snipers forward. I'm fairly confident there's nothing up there, but the vision lines aren't great, so I could be getting myself into trouble doing this. Probably better just to move the infantry forward at that point. So you can see we're getting spotted a little bit as that infantry unit moves forward, but we're going to take a shot in the rear. Doesn't do too much, but could have played that a little better. So I'm fairly confident I've gotten all or most of their artillery, so I'm just going to actually move stuff up a lot further. Pulling the snipers out now that unit is walking through there, but we'll occupy it pretty soon with the infantry. Again, I'm mostly holding this line because I don't remember where the cav comes in. I could probably actually be working on wrapping their entire line and destroying them at this point. So this is going a little slower than it probably needs to, but we're not in any particular rush either. So poking the infantry, the skirmishers up there to see if I might be able to grab that wagon. I'm not too worried about grabbing the wagon super early, just because I know the AI is largely not firing at anything. So it's not using any supply, so we can just capture them whenever we have the chance. That cav unit coming up is a little dangerous because my artillery is all going to be exposed, but it's also going to be hit by like 10 units at the same time, so I'm not too worried about it. Starting to push forward my line in the center. And it looks like there's actually nothing in the southwest at all for the AI anymore, so I'm just going to run over there and see if I can grab the wagon. Yeah, turns out there's nothing, so we take a little artillery fire when we do it, but just grab the last of the wagons. The last of their infantry is sort of sitting around in the middle up there. It'll die pretty soon. And then we've got this lone brigade sitting in the creek for whatever reason. Looks like they do have one more artillery unit we got to be a little careful about, but other than that, this is almost taken care of. And I think the AI would normally be a little more aggressive here, except it's just so outnumbered that it's not going to try anything. I'm not really sure why poke is visible. Like, I'm going to retreat that unit longer than its own length, and it'll be in heavy cover, and it still is just visible for whatever reason. It's why I don't like putting units into this line here, because you really want to try and control the north end of it, and the north end of it is almost always visible to the artillery, so you just take unnecessary casualties if you try and hold that location. So it's just better to hold behind it, in my opinion. though at this point occupying it does make sense because we're just starting to surround. Taking some casualties here, but it's not too expensive on most of these units, and it is good to get the infantry a little bit more experience. So there is definitely a point where focusing on taking 0 casualties is not worth the trade-offs in getting other units experience. It's definitely something that my personal playstyle has a little more problems with since, well, if I can sit back and just shoot something with artillery all day long, I am happy to just sit there and watch artillery shoot things, which works very well, but can be a little counterproductive when you have later battles that are going to require infantry to get involved. So, got the last of the artillery. I don't think there's any worry about taking the VP early, so I probably could just move the snipers down right now. I'm going to avoid it, but I don't think I have to do that. So we're almost to the end of this phase, and then I think Henry Hill opens up and the Cav comes in. Which is good because they only have like 2 or 3 units left. That guy moved a little far forward, so we're going to get him back in the trees. And we're just starting to start mass moving units up at this point. I'm still planning on that cavalry unit to spawn somewhere in the southwest. So you can see we have run through 2 of my 3 supply wagons. And on the mini-map, you can see the cav unit just spawned behind all of my units. And of course, it's split. So I have 2 units to try and track down in this giant area where I have no units. So now I'm turning all my infantry around and running it back towards the victory point. I'm pretty sure you can let them cap Henry Hill and not auto lose the battle, but I'm not positive. I feel like maybe I saw ATS lose this battle that way once. I'm not sure about that though. So you have, 35 minutes to try and get it back if it is an auto fail. You see that Cav definitely wants to cause me problems. I really wish I'd remembered where that unit had spawned, because then I would have just surrounded it with infantry, or at least put my infantry further back so that it was restricted to the southwest corner of the map, and it would have been much easier to track down. So getting the Cav some more experience, though I do want to be a little careful if that routing unit doesn't recover in time to fire at it. It was a little fortunate with how I played that, but so sped things up even more, was using 2x for most of the battle, moved up to 3x because it's going to take about 10 minutes to pin the Cav down. And we are actually going to take almost as many losses from the Cav as we had in the rest of the battle total. Because they are 3-star, and even with crappy carbines, they do decent amount of damage when they shoot at things. But on the upside, we prevent them from getting into artillery or anything, which is where the really bad losses would have turned up. So, mostly sending my artillery to sit on the hill in the center in case the Cav gets close enough that I can get to it. I'm trying to keep a unit on the vision point so I mostly know where the Cav is disappearing off to, because I really don't want it to get behind me. I rush everything over to the hill to try and get it back. I think I actually gave it, I think the contested timer went to 0, so I think you can give it up, but I'm not certain. Maybe I got it just in time. For whatever reason, the Cav gets to there and just decides to not move anymore, which is nice for me. Easier to surround that way. And the other unit I'm going to have to get down in the southeast, and it's just going to take a while to move everything into position to make sure that it doesn't just squeeze out, and then I have to do the whole process over and over again. And I think it's that first brigade that does most of the losses. The second brigade mostly just sits there and doesn't do anything, but the first brigade just keeps coming back, and it gets like 50 kills every time it gets off a volley, so starts to add up when, well, compared to the rest of the army, which basically never got to shoot at anything. And I don't know, maybe like I probably could have reduced those losses a little bit if instead of just sort of moving everything down, I'd actually kept a consistent line. Though I think it was still like short of waiting until artillery pulled up. I don't think I would have prevented it from shooting me too much more than I do. And unfortunately, this position on the south is kind of hard to actually get to him because you have to, like, I can set up across the river, but he can shoot me pretty easily. And I don't really want to cross the river because I'll take a lot of losses if he's shooting me there. So I'm sending some stuff around to the southwest so I can get onto him from that side. Second Brigade happily is just sort of sitting there. Charge some units, maybe we'll capture him. So we do get him. And just taking more and more losses from 1st Brigade. I want to be careful. I really don't want to take a volley with my cav because I'll take the 50. Like 50 cav is a lot more expensive than these infantry units. So he's pretty beaten up now, and get him into melee, and there we go. So that's what, 1,300 losses minus medicine. That'll be around 1,000. About, I think, 400 of those are from that cav unit alone. Some pretty ridiculous numbers on the artillery, but it was also just sitting there firing a while, so that's to be expected. Not a whole lot else did a whole lot. But we got 40,000 kills, so we'll get the rifles from it. We got another major general, lots of promotions. Those 2 captains are the supply wagons, so that doesn't really do anything, but some more 1861s, some Enfields, Napoleons, a bunch of supply, a few random rifles here or there. And a bunch of money and a bunch of recruits. So yeah, and just a ton of XP. Could have been more if I'd run units around a little bit more. It's kind of low on the infantry units, but really good XP values on most of these. And the other benefit is going into the next side battles or Antietam, our infantry took almost no losses, so we're not going to have to spend any money on it. Which helps make up a little bit for all the recruits that I dumped in the last battle. I did lower their stats a decent amount, getting them up to the 1,500. But now their stamina morale is going to be pretty high. That'll counterbalance any recruits we throw in, and firearms is the easiest stat to get up. So they'll push that up pretty well. Looks like they got a trainer, which is not great. We dropped the armory by about 5 points, but training's now up to 76. I don't think that really matters anymore because we've been facing almost nothing but 1 stars anyways. 3 stars anyways, so what does more training really do? And we're looking at facing 50k at Antietam, and we have 37 already. And we haven't even done anything else. So, yeah, that's going to be another pretty easy battle. That's Second Bull Run. As the Union, it's not particularly interesting. You just sit there and let the artillery do its work. So I'll be back with some more battles in a similar vein, and then once we get through Antietam, we'll move on to Stones River, and that's where things get interesting again. So, hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.